My name is Justin Jacobs. I'm with the Williston Research and Extension Center. I am an agronomy research specialist. And with that, I have a couple of different research efforts. My primary goal is working with variety trials, both on dryland and irrigated conditions. I work with upwards of 20 different crops in a season, canola being one of the more prominent ones that I've started working with in the last few years. On top of the variety trials, I'm also taking on some responsibility on some agronomic trials where canola has been of particular interest for me. I have worked on a fertility and population trial under irrigation, as well as worked with intercropping canola with a couple of different pulse legume crops. So today I'll be talking both on the irrigation results as well as the intercropping just briefly. I believe last year I spoke on the intercropping in length. I don't have any brand new work on the intercropping side. We'll hopefully be getting back into that next year. On the irrigation side, this project ended in 2022, but I don't know if there's been much for a summary of the results out there recently. So this project started as a result of receiving several phone calls from across the state where we are asked the question of, where we are presented with the question of, hey, I'm an irrigated producer and I've been looking at canola. The price looks really nice right now. How do I potentially grow this in an irrigated situation? We see that you have results from your variety trial. So we weren't really able to provide them a lot of clear answers because a lot of what we were doing on the irrigation side, we were following the North Dakota dryland recommendations. And we hadn't really stopped to consider whether or not there were some different scenarios that we should be looking at. So we wanted to find out what the optimal planting rate as well as the optimal fertilizer rate for an irrigated environment. We are looking primarily at the yield potential, but I also wanted to know what the economic return would be, because that's one of the most important things when it comes to farming, is how will we make money in the end. So I started looking at some of the previous work to see what had been done out there for irrigated canola production. And what I was finding was that everything for irrigated production was further west of us. So there wasn't anything really in our area or region. So again, this re-edified that we needed to figure out something directly for our area. So we looked at 6 different rates of fertility, 3 different rates of nitrogen combined with 2 different rates of sulfur. We had 4 different populations. We were using a precision vacuum planter, so we were able to get down to the populations that we wanted. The recommendation on the dryland side for North Dakota is that you plant about 4 to 8 pounds of seed per acre. In a higher yielding environment, there is some chance to go at a little bit lower of a population. Since 2008, the average is about 1,700 pounds. And so what did we find? Well, we found that as you increase the fertilizer rate, the trend over the 3 years was for the canola yield to increase as well. Now, that looks nice until you start looking at it from an economic standpoint. In 2020, we had 16 cents a pound, 21, 19 cents a pound, and 22, we had 26 cents a pound. So that accounts for the rise in our gross return as well as our net return. But you'll see the cost stays fairly similar throughout the 3 years. And now what you'll notice is that net return, when we're looking at the population side, that net return kind of hits little bit of a peak around 520,000 seeds, and then starts dropping after we exceed that population. Whereas our cost continues to increase, so it appears that there's a little bit of a economic loss when we increase our population past 520,000 in irrigated environment. When we look at the fertilizer side, we kind of see a similar trend to where we hit about the 150 pounds of nitrogen. And again, we begin to lose our overall net return. As you'll see in going back a couple of slides to talk about the yields, in 2020, we averaged right around 3,000 pounds among all the treatments. In 21, we had a low end of 2,500 pounds to just under 3,000 pounds. In 22, we had a little bit of flea beetle damage that set our yields back a little bit, and that resulted in slightly lower yields in 22 overall. Now, when we look at the conclusion of this particular trial, we find that what we are finding in the western environments of Oregon and Washington State, they were finding that about for every 4 to 7 pounds of N, you would gain about 100, or you needed about 4 to 7 pounds of N for every 100 pounds of yield. So we found that to be similar here in North Dakota. We were finding the results to be about 6 pounds of N needed for about every 100 pounds of yield. When you're looking at it visually, it's hard to see a difference between the populations initially until you kind of got down on your hands and knees and you started seeing a lot of those skinnier stems, kind of like what Brian was showing us earlier. And that was when we started exceeding that 780,000 population. The lower population at 260 and 520 even, we saw a lot more branching there, so a lot more ground cover initially. So the next project that I've been working on here and there, and again, unfortunately, I did not get any new, I did not have a new study last year. We were kind of shorthanded, so we didn't get anything brand new put in on the intercropping side. I'm hoping to maybe have something a little bit this year, as well as going into the future. So what is intercropping? Intercropping is growing 2 or more crops together in a close proximity. We can use it either for a forage and hay production, such as peas and barley, peas and oats, cut for a higher protein mix, or we can do a relay cropping system where we have a fall planted rye that we seed soybeans or some other crop directly into in the spring, let the rye mature, take that off, and then let the soybeans canopy above the stubble and take the soybeans off later. Or we have the final option of a mixed grain intercropping system, which is what I'm most passionate about, where we're planting both crops at the same exact time, we're harvesting both crops at the same exact time, and then using a post-harvest method of separation, such as a rotary screen or a quick clean screener. I believe that the mixed grain intercropping system kind of has the best potential for overall efficiency in our current agricultural systems. So when we're talking about mixed grain intercropping, we're looking at the possibility, the potential of having multiple root species in the soil profile. There's numerous reports out there that state that this is very good for our soil microbes and microorganisms. This gives them a buffet to feed off of for root exudates. Again, this increases our efficiency, where we can now have 2 different crops growing at once. We now have 2 different marketable crops to sell for later. although there might be a little bit of a yield drag on the crops if you look at them individually, when you combine the overall yield, the overall production of that field should increase. There are some risks. There are some ways that intercropping can actually reduce some of your risks. For example, so I farm as well near Ray, and last year I had an intercrop that was a mustard and pea mix, and I had one area that was particularly wet, that the mustard did not come up at all. The peas did, but you could definitely tell the difference between the peas where they were growing by themselves versus where they are growing in companion with a mustard. Whereas if I would have planted that field entirely to mustard, I would have had a bare spot that would have had nothing growing. Additionally, there might also be some reduced risks in potential devastating circumstances such as hail. There might be some protection from caused by the crops helping one another. So the trial, and I believe I spoke on this last year a little bit. This trial was composed in 2019 and 2020. We had a site in Nesson Valley where we had an irrigated and a non-irrigated. And then we also had a Carrington site where we had a non-irrigated trial solely. In Nesson, we are looking at alternating rows, 7.5-inch spacing between the rows, so 15 inches between the same crop. And then in Carrington, we're a mixed row system, 7.5 inches between the crop or between the rows. We were looking at 6 different treatments. We had peas planted at 180 pounds to the acre, canola planted at 4 pounds to the acre. We are using a Clearfield canola so that we could use Imazamox in the system for our weed control. We did see some damage from the Imazamox on the peas in 2020. The peas were severely stunted and as a result affected some of the yields. We did see, or we had 4 different planting ratios where we were looking at a 66% with a 66%. So when I say 66%, I'm talking 66% of the monocrop. So in the case of peas, that'd be 120 pounds with 3 pounds of canola. We had 4 different ratios, and then we were also looking at it from a fertilizer perspective of to what rate could we reduce our fertilizer application and perhaps see a reduction in our input cost, but also a increase in our net profit. So we had 3 different rates where we used the 120 pounds of N per acre based on canola fertilizer requirements. We did apply 30 pounds of sulfur. And overall, when we're looking at the dryland environments, what we wanted to see was the combination of the peas and canola growing together, where they out yielded either the sole component of the peas or the sole component of the canola. And as you can see, we achieved that with all 4 planting ratios across both the Nesson Valley non-irrigated and the Carrington dryland environments in 2019 and 2020. And when we look at the economic impact, as you can see, there's very little input when we're raising peas by themselves versus when we're raising canola by itself. That's the red line. The gross return, the gross expense is a lot less when we're raising peas. However, when we include canola, we increase our expense of raising peas. However, we see that the overall return is greater, the overall gross return is greater among a pea and canola intercropping system opposed to a sole crop. In 2022, we had kind of a demonstration trial hosted up in Crosby and Divide County, where we were looking at multiple different intercropping mixes to just kind of throw everything at the wall to see what would stick. We had 4 different large seeded crops with 3 different small seeded crops. The large seeded crops were dry peas, lentils, chickpeas, and soybeans. And then the small seeded crops were mustard, canola, and flax. Unfortunately, the chickpea and the soybean plots had to be abandoned as a result of kochia pressure that just overwhelmed. We had some issues at that particular site where we had to get some resistant kochia under control. We're hoping that when we return there, that we'll have a little better result on some of those crops going forward. But when we looked at the dry pea and the lentil, their best yields, the best yields and the best LER, and the LER is the land equivalency ratio. So if we have a value of 1.0, it means we're 100% efficient. Whereas if we have a value less than 1.0, we are losing efficiency somewhere. Or if we have a value greater than 1.0, we are gaining our efficiency. That is calculated based on the yield of the component crop in the intercrop. So the yield of the canola we'll just take the 90-pound dry pea and the 2-pound canola. We take the canola yield of 787, divide that by the yield of 1830, and we will get our canola LER value of 0.43. Whereas on the pea side, we then take 1234.4 divided by 1980, and we get 0.62. And we add those together to get a LER value of 1.05. This is how we increase our overall efficiency. And as a result, the best results came from a canola component mixed with either a lentil or a pea, or a mustard mixed with either a lentil or a pea. With that, I'd like to conclude my presentation. I can be contacted by calling or texting the number provided, or emailed at any time. Thank you for letting me present today.